Hello again, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this Monday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm David Percy. Up first on the headline chart here, dense smoke, areas of dense smoke in the central interior up to the northeast. Minchumina had a quarter-mile in dense smoke during the morning hours today. Farther to the east, Nenana about 1.5 miles, and then up to the northeast, Fort Yukon running 2.5 miles, and Tanana had about 4 miles in smoke. Quite an area there extends from the central interior up to the northeast and then on into the northwest territories of Canada, staying mostly north and northwest of the Alaska Range. On the hazardous weather graphic, due to the dense smoke, there's a dense smoke advisory out for the central interior for overnight tonight. Otherwise, no watches, warnings, or advisories out anywhere else around the state due to a distinct lack of any active storminess. And moving on to the fire danger chart for Spruce specifically, you can see big area of extreme fire danger up along the Yukon, Porcupine River areas in the Yukon Flats. And then in Fairbanks area, quite a pretty extreme fire danger around the greater Fairbanks area there, and the central interior with a lot of very high fire danger, central interior down into the northern Kuskokwim Valley, and then on up to the northeast. Also in the Copper River Basin, areas of high to very high fire danger, and the Susitna Valley, high to very high and high fire danger over the Kenai Peninsula up into the Anchorage area. And you can see some high fire danger extending southward into the Iliamna Lake area, and also quite an area over the southern Panhandle, and then up toward Haines along the Haines Highway. Very high fire danger up in that area, and then pretty blue over the western part of the state due to the clouds and moisture that's been in over that area for the last day or so. Satellite imagery showing all the clouds over the Bering Sea with kind of a counterclockwise circulation indicating low pressure there southwest of St. Matthew Island, northwest of the Pribilofs, of the front from area west of the Pribilofs down across Adak. Today with rain, Adak to Atka. Also a flow of moisture from south to north-northeast there over the western interior, keeping it cloudy, damper, and cooler with low clouds once again up into northern Cook Inlet, southern Susitna Valley, clearing out this afternoon once again over the Kenai Peninsula. And also some breaks there around Kodiak Island, clearing out in Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast, but still quite an extensive area, low clouds and fog, eastern North Gulf Coast along the coastal areas of the Panhandle. But you can see clear skies on this visual imagery in over the southeast coast there. Afternoon temperatures are quite varied and variable there over the Panhandle, with temperatures Cape Decision had 48 degrees, and while at the same time Cake had 76 degrees, and even warmer up closer to 80 there in the Haines Highway up to the north. Otherwise, lots of sunshine south of the Alaska Range, lots of smoke north of the Alaska Range, all the way up to the southern Brooks Range there. And rolling this into the IR mode, you can see remnants of a weakening system, the higher colder clouds pushing into the western Alaska Range, some cirrus into southern Cook Inlet, and a little bit heavier cloudiness over the western Brooks Range. In fact, anywhere up to a quarter inch in the last 24 hours falling in the western upslope areas of the southern western Alaska Range there. Selawik picked up about a quarter of an inch of rain, and St. Mary's and Nenana picking up about 1/10 of an inch of rain. That's classified a wetting rain there. And over Bristol Bay, anywhere from 1 to 2/10 of an inch of rainfall, again in the last 24 hours. Out to the west, a quarter of an inch of rain with that kind of mediocre frontal boundary there over the central Aleutian areas. On the chart today, all the smoke is showing there in the central interior up to the northeast, north of the Alaska Range there, and into the northwest territories of the Yukon. Scattered thunderstorms starting to develop over the Talkeetnas and eastern Alaska Range, with quite an area of clouds and showers, especially over the northwest interior, kind of tapering off down into the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, with surface high pressure kind of signifying the cooler air mass out that way. And next storm over the central Aleutians with the small craft advisory level winds will tonight advance eastward, and winds and rain will increase, especially for Unimak Island and to a lesser extent on Alaska Island. And the Pribilofs will see an increase in the winds a little bit, maybe up to 25 miles an hour, but rain staying back to the west there. Otherwise, a couple of disturbances bringing a couple of surges of light rain, fog, and drizzle along the Arctic coast and North Slope and into the western Brooks Range area. Otherwise, no change over the interior. Those thunderstorms from the Yukon River Eagle area down to the eastern Alaska Range will be tapering off overnight tonight. And low clouds and fog to a lesser extent over Cook Inlet tonight, what we saw last night, the last couple of nights actually. Chance of showers over the southern panhandle, maybe some drizzle along the central coast falling out of that low cloud deck. And for Tuesday, look for partly to mostly sunny skies for the panhandle, at the risk of some showers, low clouds and fog on the afternoon along the coast. Again, making quite a variation in temperatures in the afternoon there for the panhandle. Scattered thunderstorms possibly developing now over the Talkeetna Mountains and the eastern Alaska Range, Wrangles right on up again to around the Eagle area. And showers still scattered over the western interior along with the areas of smoke in the central. Should stay mostly north and northwest of the Alaska Range. That front weakens as it spreads rain into the eastern Aleutians there with a little bit of a pickup in the winds, rain and breezy with IFR flying conditions for the Pribilofs. In fact, IFR flying conditions most of the Aleutians and Bering Sea right up through the Bering Strait for the next couple of days. And then for the outlook on Wednesday, really not much change over the interior except temperatures on the rebound. South central Alaska, Susitna Valley probably back into the lower 80s for your afternoon highs, and 75 to 80 for the Kenai Peninsula up through Anchorage, Palmer, Matanuska Valley. And that should trigger some afternoon thunderstorm activity over the Talkeetnas, possibly into the northern Chugach Mountains, northern Kenai Peninsula, and as well as the Copper River Basin, Wrangell Mountains, eastern Alaska Range. Stays dry over the panhandle with a chance of showers in the north. And another system moves up. The original one really washes out as that next one kind of takes the energy from it. And just a weak trough over the Alaska Peninsula. Small craft advisory winds with rain moving into the central Aleutians, pushing in toward Nikolsky and the Pribilofs late in the day. Lows tonight, 40s and 50s, North Slope, maybe some mid-30s on the Arctic coast, otherwise 40s and 50s across much of the state. And for highs tomorrow, 80 to 85 over the northern panhandle, otherwise in the 70s elsewhere. And along the coast, probably in the 50s. Near 80 for the Copper River Basin, 65 to 75 Kenai Peninsula, Susitna Valley, even tomorrow pushing 80 degrees once again. And upper 70s to lower 80s, eastern interior, cooler back out to the west. And lows Wednesday morning, much like we'll see tomorrow morning, pretty mild over the panhandle, 55 to 60 for the lows, especially in the north. Upper 40s to mid 50s, southern Alaska. And then the highs, 78 to 86, say, for the Susitna Valley, and 65 to 75 for the Kenai Peninsula. Inland areas may approach 80 again, and lower 80s for the Copper River Basin.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Tuesday morning's flying weather, marginal VFR right along the Arctic coast with IFR into the DeLong Mountains northwest coast there. Western Seward Peninsula covering all the Bering Sea, all of the Aleutians, most of the Alaska Peninsula, southern Kodiak Island into the Gulf. Marginal VFR, Bristol Bay. IFR, though, into the southwest mountains there, the Kilbrook, Auckland Mountains areas, but probably not into the Kuskokwim Valley. Marginal VFR again, southern Cook Inlet up into the western Alaska Range, at least the lower elevations, the eastern slopes of the western range there. And then some IFR right along the south coast of the Panhandle. And moving on to the afternoon forecast. Let me get the cursor in the right window here. There we go. VFR, interior Alaska, marginal along the Arctic coast. Marginal VFR pushing eastward into the western Brooks Range now. And at least the western half of the Seward Peninsula kind of marginal. Southwest coast, same thing. Togiak Bay to just west of Dillingham, marginal VFR. Dillingham eastward, King Salmon, Agagik, Iliamna, all VFR. Marginal VFR, Alaska Peninsula. Solid IFR for the Aleutians in the Bering Sea through the Strait, and IFR now off the southern southeast coast, with marginal VFR into Prince of Wales Island and into Dixon Entrance, Metlakatla, over towards Stewart, Misty Fjords area. Then that goes IFR over the southern southeast coast Wednesday morning, marginal VFR southern half of Panhandle, or a little farther to the north. Good VFR Fogneck Island, right on up into the North Slope, no change out west. And western Arctic coast might start out VFR and then go marginal, kind of off and on. Marginal VFR clinging to the coastline up there, with the IFR a little farther to the north and west, but coming down across Point Hope, Cape Lisburne, maybe Kivalina to Tin City, Wales area. St. Lawrence Island southward, IFR again, Pribilofs, all the Aleutians, and some marginal VFR, scattered areas of VFR for Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula. Sitkinak, marginal, but Kodiak, Fognak Islands, VFR, as well as all of interior Alaska for the afternoon. IFR now right along the southeast coast. Marginal VFR in over the northern coast areas, definitely Elfin Cove, Yakutat, and the southern Panhandle, right up into, looks like Petersburg, southward to Misty Fjords, and into Dixon Entrance. Anatuvik, VFR, another VFR day for Adigan as well. Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR flying. Rainy, VFR. Windy, VFR. Isabel, VFR. Mentasta, VFR. Staying VFR for Tanita and Portage, VFR. Chilkoot and White, VFR. Easy forecast there. Freezing levels, 6,000 to 8,000 feet. 6,000 feet down to the Seward Peninsula, 8,000 feet across the Yukon Delta. Then the upper level ridge that's the axis of which kind of comes up along the southeast coast there into the Yukon, so 10,000 feet plus there. And then the colder pool out over the western and southwest Bering Sea, 6,000 to 8,000 feet. Icing ahead of that cold pool, the frontal boundary, and heavier icing with the moisture, considerable moderate, moving up southwest of the Pribilofs, otherwise isolated moderate, moving into the Fox Islands. And look for some mixed icing, isolated moderate into the southern Panhandle, a couple of bands of rime icing of the mostly light variety there from the Brooks Range to the eastern Arctic coast. Another one making landfall on the central and western Arctic coast. Jet stream, pretty good low pressure at 33,000 feet there over the southwest Bering, with westerlies at about 90 knots in toward Adak. Otherwise, pretty light flow across the Gulf, southern Alaska, and really even to the north, kind of a trough there crossing the eastern Arctic coast, northwest flow behind that, southwest in advance of that. And at 9,000 feet, westerlies 25 to 35 knots into the Kotzebue Sound area, or just to the west, and up to the central Arctic coast. 45 knot southerlies in advance of the low over the southwest Bering Sea, but west of the Pribilofs. Light and variable southern Alaska and the Panhandle. 3,000 feet south to southwest winds, 40 to 45 knots there from the Fox Islands up across the Pribilofs. And then southwest 30 to 55 knots there coming out of the Russian Far East across the Chukchi Sea into the western Arctic coast and the northwest coast. Turbulence, light to isolated moderate chop, surface 5,000 feet for the western Arctic coast and also the central Aleutians and the Pribilofs.
Can be many miles long, from 1 to 100 feet high, traveling at 400 miles per hour. This ocean monster is known as a tsunami, and it can wreak havoc on coastal populations and landscapes. A tsunami is a series of ocean waves caused by any large and sudden disturbance of the sea surface. Tsunamis can be generated by landslides, volcanic eruptions, or even meteorite impacts in the ocean, but they are most often caused by an earthquake where there's a sudden displacement of the ocean floor. When that happens, there's a transfer of energy from the sea floor to the ocean, causing waves on the surface to radiate outward in all directions. In deep waters, these waves may not even be detectable. But when the tsunami enters shallower waters, the wave speed slows and its height increases. The water along the coast may recede noticeably. A large wall of turbulent water, called a bore, may also form. When the tsunami hits, It may come ashore like a fast-rising flood and strike with devastating force. The series of waves may continue for hours. The first one may not be the last or the largest. For your safety, know the potential warning signs of an incoming tsunami. A strong earthquake that causes difficulty standing. A rapid rise or fall of the water along the coast. A loud ocean roar. When you're in a coastal area, it's important to keep alert for messages from local officials, such as lifeguards, police, the U.S. Tsunami Warning Centers, and NOAA All Hazards Radio. If you find yourself in a location of a tsunami strike, here's what you need to do to stay safe. Keep calm. Walk or run to higher ground, 100 feet above sea level or 1 mile inland. Do not drive. Keep roads open for emergency vehicles. If you cannot move to higher ground, use the stairs to get to the 3rd floor or higher in a sturdy building. Follow all instructions from local officials and stay out of coastal areas until authorities issue an all clear. Tsunamis can strike any coastline in the world and can affect locations thousands of miles away from where they formed. They may be uncommon, but the devastation they cause makes them a deadly force in nature. For more information on tsunamis, go to the following sites.
Tsunami, a killer wave, speeding across the ocean at 400 miles an hour. It smashes into land, destroying everything in its path. Tsunamis do not have a season, but they can strike any coast at any time. If one forms close to the shore, the shaking of the earth and a loud roar may warn of its approach. But when a tsunami forms across the ocean, it can take hours to reach the shore, enough time to warn people to move to higher land. Over the past 20 years, NOAA has developed DART, a real-time monitoring system that provides data for forecasting tsunamis. The DART systems have been deployed in earthquake-prone areas throughout the ocean, including the Pacific and Indian basins. A DART system combines a surface buoy and a sensor on the ocean floor. This sensor detects changes in water pressure and seismic activity and transmits the data back to the surface. If these changes indicate a tsunami may form, the buoy signals an alert via satellite to the tsunami warning centers in Alaska and Hawaii. Back at the centers, scientists plug the data into pre-existing models. These models predict the height, the arrival time, and the coastal locations that the tsunami will hit. Watches and warnings are issued to the affected communities so preparations can begin. Today, 47 DART stations are positioned all around the world, ready to detect and warn coastal communities about the next potential tsunami. With the DART system and tsunami warning centers in place, we are now better prepared to predict the killer wave before it strikes.
December 26, 2004. What began as an undersea earthquake in the Indian Ocean ended as the most deadly tsunami in recorded history, with nearly 240,000 lives lost. This was a devastating wake-up call to coastal communities and tsunami research. Prior to this event, only 6 of NOAA's Deep Ocean Assessment and Reporting of Tsunami, or DART, buoys were in place. Scientists could only predict tsunami arrival times, not flood potential. and there was not a global tsunami warning system. Today, 10 years later, we can tell a different story. U.S. and international coastlines are far better prepared for such a catastrophe, thanks in large part to research and technology developed at the NOAA Center for Tsunami Research at Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory. NOAA's DART array is now complete, with 39 buoys operated by the National Weather Service's National Data Buoy Center. Along with 21 international buoys, this array can measure a tsunami wave as small as 1 centimeter in the open ocean and provide these data in real time to forecast when a tsunami may hit the coast and how much flooding there will be. NOAA scientists and engineers are currently testing the 4th-generation DART buoy that will be able to measure local tsunamis as well as distant ones. Flooding forecast models incorporate local topography and historical tsunami data in order to more accurately predict exactly how a tsunami might behave when it reaches shore. NOAA has 75 site-specific models that can provide high-resolution flooding forecasts for effective response and mitigation during a tsunami event. NOAA has gathered data from every tsunami since 2004 to improve its forecast models. Today, it operates the world's only real-time tsunami flooding forecast system using DART data to accurately compute flooding forecasts. The NOAA Tsunami Warning Centers make tsunami data available on the internet and issue advisories, watches, and warnings through the Emergency Alert System and via NOAA weather radios. While it is impossible to prevent a tsunami, we are now much better prepared to detect them and predict their paths and impacts, so those in coastal communities can take the steps necessary to safely protect themselves.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Coastal water forecasts, small craft advisories for the coast along the panhandle there for north to northwest winds at 25 knots, seas running 8 to 11 feet. Lighter winds over the inside waters, all out of the northwest at about 10 knots with seas at 2 feet. And then for Wednesday, switch the direction over the inner channel areas. Lincoln Glacier Bay afternoon breeze from the south at 15 knots, seas 3 feet. Otherwise, Stevens Passage, south winds at 10 knots, southeast winds 10 knots for Clarence Strait. Small craft advisories continue for the south coast for northwesterlies at 25 knots, and then west winds at 20 knots for the north coast with seas running 7 to 9 feet. Prince William Sound, west winds 10 knots, seas 2 feet. Small craft advisories for the North Gulf Coast, west-southwest winds 25 to 30 knots, seas around 6 feet. Small craft advisories for the Barren Islands, west winds 30 knots. Kemishak Bay, winds will be out of the west at 20 knots for Tuesday. Cook Inlet, light variable winds 10 knots, seas pretty slight at 2 feet. And then for Wednesday, Cook Inlet, afternoon breeze from the south and southwest at about 15 knots. Seas 3 to 4 feet. Prince William Sound, variable winds at 10 knots. North Gulf Coast, southwest winds 20 knots. Small craft advisories for the Barren Islands for southwest winds at 25 knots. Kodiak Island, southwest winds 20 knots, seas 5 feet. In the Alaska Peninsula, Bering Sea side, southeast winds 15 knots. And from Cape Sarachev to Sitkinak, light variable winds at 10 knots. Bristol Bay, same forecast, light variable winds at 10 knots. And for Wednesday, Bristol Bay, southwest breeze at 10 knots. Alaska Peninsula, south to southeast winds 15 to 20 knots. And Kodiak Island, southwest breeze at 20 knots, seas 5 feet. And for the eastern Aleutians, small craft advisories for Tuesday, south to southeast winds 25 to 30 knots, seas running 7 to 10 feet. Adak and Atka, west-southwest winds 15 to 20 knots. And from Chitka Island, west winds at 15 knots, western Aleutians northwest at 15. Western Aleutians on Wednesday, variable winds at 10 knots, otherwise for Adak and Atka, south to southeast winds 15 to 25 knots. Small craft advisories continue for the Fox Islands for south to southeast winds 25 to 30 knots, seas 7 to 9 feet. Pribilof Island, St. Paul, St. George, southeast winds on Tuesday at 30 knots, and also small craft advisories St. Matthew Island, southeast at 25. Southwest coast, southeast winds 15 to 20 knots. St. Lawrence Island, south at 15. And for Wednesday, light variable winds over Norton Sound. St. Lawrence Island, southeast breeze at 15 knots. Small craft advisories for the Yukon Delta coast and the Pribilof Islands for southeast winds at 25 knots, with seas as high as 8 feet. Otherwise, the Kuskokwim Delta coast looking at southeast winds on Wednesday at 20 knots. Southeast at 20 also for St. Lawrence or St. Matthew Island, with seas at 5 feet. Up to the north, eastern Beaufort Sea coast, on average westerly winds at 10 to 15 knots, and the central coast more of a southwest direction at 15 knots. Western Arctic coast, south winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet in ice-free waters, and small craft advisories. Cape Beaufort to Wales, south winds 25 knots with 5-foot seas. And for Wednesday, small craft advisories from Wales to Cape Beaufort, south winds 25 to 30 knots. And for the western Arctic coast, small craft advisories, southwest winds increasing to 30 knots, seas building to just under 10 feet. Central Arctic coast, brisk wind advisories, south winds 25 knots. And the lighter wind pattern continues to the eastern Beaufort Sea coast out of the south and out of the southwest and west, 10 to 15 knots. For tonight, a couple of troughs skirting eastward along the Arctic coast and North Slope, bringing some light rain, fog, and drizzle and showers at times. The Brooks Range on out to the coastline. The heavier amounts appearing to be there on the western Arctic coast, but even that's going to be pretty light. A lot of smoke over the central interior right up to the Yukon Flats and then on eastward there into the Yukon, with diminishing showers there for the upper Tanana Valley 40-mile country. Dry elsewhere south of the Brooks Range. Front spreading some rain toward the Fox Islands. Dry for the Panhandle. For tomorrow, periods of rain, fog, and drizzle for the eastern Aleutians and Pribilof Islands. Otherwise, areas of smoke, interior Alaska, especially the central and eastern interior north of the Alaska Range, but some of that might try to start spilling through the passes of the Alaska Range in the northern Susitna Valley and Copper River Basin. Otherwise, more of the same for Wednesday. Thank you for joining us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.